Diogo Monica. Welcome on to Searching for Mana.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you on the show. Not Diego, Diogo.
That's correct.
What are you planning to do? As an initiative, you've got to rebrand your name out there.
I always make this joke that if I ever make enough money, I'm buying San Diego and renaming it San Diogo, so everybody can suffer the way that I've suffered.
That's hilarious. I'm fortunate because Lloyd, for some reason, seems to be very popular amongst all different business sectors, pharmacies, banks, insurance, whatever it might be. Apart from sometimes it's spelt with one L in preference to two L, which is madness. So really excited to have you on the show. We have with us, guys, an individual who I think when we were having a prep call described yourself as, overly enthusiastic about security. It's really like if there's a thing that you love, it's security. And that sounds, relatively strange until you start to understand how exciting it's been through the lens of a hacker. CS network security PhD back in the day, and then worked with Square, focused on platform security, Docker, and then founded Anchorage Digital in 2017. And I won't spoil, too much there. I want you to talk us through it, but broad brush. Diego is a co-founder and the president there, a few hundred employees, and really probably number one in mind when you're thinking of trusted crypto platform for institutions. And we'll cut into all of this and we'll also go through your journey. So if you could be so kind to explain eloquently, way more eloquently than I could, what Anchorage Digital is all about and what you're up to there right now, please.
Of course. So as mentioned, we started in 2017. The original ambition was to solve a very specific problem for institutions, which was the lack of trusted custody for institutions to come into crypto. That was it. In 2017, the status quo of storing cryptocurrencies, whether it was Bitcoin or Ethereum, was doing what I lovingly call pirate custody. Pirate custody is the same technology that the pirates used in the 1700s to protect their gold coins. They had gold coins. They would put them in treasure chests. They would bury them in islands, and then they would have these treasure maps to find them again. And in 2017 and 2016 and before, institutions were doing the exact same thing, but with little USB key, private keys that they were storing in safety deposit boxes in a mountain somewhere in Switzerland. And then instead of a treasure map, they had a checklist on how to go get it. But that was essentially pirate custody as it stands. Of course, to myself and my co-founder, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we've met later, but we were security and are security engineers by education. And so what we looked at this problem is we looked at this problem with a lens of we have been doing these types of private key protection for over a decade now. We know how to do this better. And there's no way that we have cryptocurrencies and these crypto assets, the way that they revolutionize the money of the internet and finance is somehow being stored in a safety deposit box somewhere. We will have to use them more and more. These private keys will need to be used more and more. And so private custody is not sufficient. So that was the instinct, the driver to start the company. Today, Anchorage Digital is pretty different. Right now, we are the first and still only federally chartered bank in the United States. So we actually have a banking charter, the same charter as JP Morgan Chase, the same charter as BNY Mellon, which is very unique. And we use that charter to do custody, to do staking of crypto assets, to do settlements. And the company in general also has a lending business, financing business. We custody now over hundreds. We custody hundreds of different cryptocurrencies and do a lot of integrations, such as we custody Visa's first NFT. So we do NFT custody now. We custody securities because we're a bank. So we have integrations with alternative trading systems where they can actually do custody and settlement of securities in these ATS platforms that want to tokenize everything. We do settlement and transformation of fiat currency into stablecoins and back and forth. And so there's many things that we are today. The summary is a platform that allows institutions to build products in crypto in an easy, safe, and regulated manner.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. Clearly a monumental opportunity that you created and are sat on. In terms of some internal company scale, I mean, I threw out that there's a few hundred people, but if you could just cut up geographies, staff, some of the internal structuring of the business, and really through the lens of, you know, what type of stats would a venture capitalist look at this? Your I believe, Series D, but just some of those numbers, please.
Of course. So at this point, we are just about 350 people. The distribution is, funny enough, pre-pandemic, 95% San Francisco. And post-pandemic, we are less than 20% Bay Area. So that's funny. We have people in Seattle, we have people in LA, we have people still in the Bay Area, but now we have an office in New York, which is our biggest office. We have an office in Portugal, which is soon to be our biggest office. It is the fastest growing office for Anchorage, specifically on technical talent. We have Singapore, and we also have a small office in South Dakota and a small office in Indiana. So we've really spread out since the one office that we had pre-pandemic to now having 7 plus. And when I mean office, I mean in the general sense of the word office, groups of aggregated people. There's not actual leases on all these places as post-COVID world. I think it's maybe a topic for another time, but that's an interesting one. In terms of the business itself and the client base, primarily United States still. I would say that our client base is still 70% US based, which makes sense if you think that about 50% of the world's business in crypto is still within the United States. And then the biggest next set of clients comes from Asia. And so we do have an entity in Singapore that is regulated by the MAS. In the United States, our charter is under the OCC, the oldest banking regulator in the United States, and in Singapore is under the MAS, which is the regulator, a fully integrated regulator. Really interesting. Singapore is a really interesting country, and that regulator is also really interesting. The fact that everything is under one umbrella. And the rest of the clients are in Europe and a little bit in South America. So think 70, 15, 10, and then the rest of it is in Europe. In terms of other stats, we at this point, our Series D company raised $350 million in December 2021 from KKR was the lead, but other folks like Apollo, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, PayPal, all those folks came in. And before that, our Series C had been led by the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore, GIC. Before that, Visa and Blockchain Capital co-led it, and our Series A was led by Andreessen and Horowitz.
You just made a very interesting investment this week into.
I've actually seen it. It was pretty interesting.
We're in the middle of 2022, and it's been a bear market, and there's some banter going around VC Twitter that has ended now with this massive investment into Adam Neumann's next venture. Who would bet against him? Who would bet against him?
Right. And you need conviction to make that bet. So if nothing else, it shows pretty deep conviction on this founder and on this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. That's flow, isn't it, Steve?
That's right. That's flow.
So thanks for the context. I just want to dig into trying to get the aha moment of Anchorage Digital right now. So I find it quite useful for me and the audience if you could talk us through a case study, you know, an example of, for instance, specifically, it could be one of the NFT examples you gave, whatever you prefer, where your platform is being utilized, where we can really visualize that in real time, please.
Of course. I'll give you one of the most recent ones that we've just announced. We've announced a partnership with AngelList. AngelList, as you know, is probably the most popular crowdfunding platform. It allows any investor to participate in rounds of startups. It aggregates them, allows you to create SPVs, all of these different things that are just startup related, that it makes it easier on us. And so I use this example because most people that are listening to this podcast know AngelList intimately, and so they understand what's happening. So what we've enabled AngelList to do is allow investors to use stablecoins, in this case USDC, but it could be anything, to invest in these startups. Why is this advantageous? Well, it turns out that stablecoins work 24/7 and have instant settlement. And so when you're trying to invest in a company at 5 p.m. on a Friday night, you're going to have to wait for Monday morning to wire. And if you are wiring, there's this period of uncertainty from 24 to 48 hours of what's actually happening with the funds. And so for startups, number one, that delays the funding. Number two, for the company that actually has the platform, ACH and these other mechanisms have a clawback period of sometimes 30 days where you don't actually know if you have the funds or if you don't have the funds, because it can be clawed back. So it's not final within 30 days. You need more than 30 days for finality. And these transactions are not instant. And when you start coming into the crypto world and you have a wallet with USDC, you realize how much easier it is to actually fund using cryptocurrencies than it is to fund using traditional financial websites. In terms of, I don't know about you, but every single angel investment that I do, I would say 50% of them get frozen because they are high amounts, wires. They're not part of whatever traditional view they have on me. So they constantly freeze every single wire. And that is obviously very upsetting, because what would be a wire that I do on a website now becomes a wire on a website plus 45 minutes on a phone call, talking to a risk department to get my account unfrozen, plus obviously waiting the 24 to 48 hours for that to fund. So the friction that exists right now in the traditional financial world really leads people to have better alternatives in using USDC and using other stable coins with the safety of Anchorage, with the ease of fund, with instant finality. 24/7 just becomes a very exciting opportunity for these startups. Finally, something that is also not appreciated is the fact that many of these startups are now electing to not really create a bank account or not be forced to create a bank account immediately off the gate. So they can actually just fundraise off of an iPhone. They download an app, they generate an Ethereum address, and then they can actually go out and raise funds. They don't need to go through weeks of KYC, of onboarding, of going to traditional banks, of having to deal with that morass to actually take in funds. And that's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for talking us through that. As we spoke, there's two other shows that could come out of this. We could talk about angel investing for a whole other show, which we'll leave that for now. So thanks for
fun
that.
Stat. I just passed my 100 angel investment mark.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. I don't know if it's good or not, because as you know, kind of like the cycle to understand whether you've done good investments is very long. There's no feedback cycle, but
what do you reckon? So, 1 in 10 pays for the 9. So you've just hit 100. Where do you think you're at?
Well, it's been very weird, my angel career investment, because investments 2 and 3 have already paid for all of the money they've already ever invested. So I was very early in Filecoin. I was very early in a couple other companies that got acquired and were very successful. But within my first 5 investments, like 3 of them were a success. 2 of them were just what you'd expect the power law returns to be. I think at some point the average for Filecoin was 360x. And of course, like it averages out to depending on when you sell it. But if you have 3 of those in your first 5, then all of a sudden the rest of it doesn't really matter. You're just doing it for fun.
What do you think review critique allowed you off the cuff to be that successful?
Well, it's very hard. Well, it's very hard for me to justify that is deep due diligence, because there isn't deep due diligence. I have a full-time role, and so the amount of time that you do in diligence is very small. So let's put that out. My scrutiny on the company and the goals of the company are not actually coming into this factor of decision. I think what it's left is access. It's just being part of these communities that are very exciting, and to a certain extent being in the right market, especially in the cryptocurrency elements. The fact that I've been lucky enough to start a company that is very relevant in the space means that I get a lot of deal flow and invites into places where the company definitely benefits from having me on board and having advice and understanding how custody works and how trading works and prime brokerage and crypto works. And so I end up having access to those deals that are just incredible founders. And so that's all that I've ever filtered on my personal angel career. If I was a career VC, obviously this would be a very different type of decision making and very type of number of investments on a yearly basis, et cetera, et cetera. But me as an angel, the way that I see me doing this, I do this because I love buying investor updates. I just absolutely love seeing investor updates. I love seeing the progress. I love seeing different regions of the space. I love seeing what the entrepreneurs are doing, what they're putting in there. the struggles that they go through, being able to help in certain circumstances, seeing patterns. I just like that. So to a certain extent, my conclusion here, it just has to be that I've been in the right place at the right time, and I said yes. That's it. That's the only conclusion that it can have out of it. There's no other there's no other conclusion off of the success of the first 5 angel investments that I can that, and I don't know if it's replicable. Right? We'll see.
What are you most excited at the moment?
There's quite a few, and the range is pretty all over the place. But I would say another advantage of being an angel investor is the fact that you don't actually have to, there's no conflict of interest. So you can actually make multiple bets on companies that if you were a traditional VC probably would be conflicted out of. And that's interesting too, because you can create a portfolio in a way of areas that you love. And one area that I love that I've created actually a pretty large portfolio, a significant percentage of the actual bets are these crypto neobanks. So these fintechs that are coming at it with a very, very different view over how they should be building things, or how easy it is should be to onboard, or how the actual banking partnership with clients should be. I think a couple of examples there are all the way to actually something that is not a bank. Of course, it's not a regulated bank, but it allows you to have Visa cards being issued with the backing of your crypto, allows you to have checking accounts, allows you to have bill pay, allows you to have all of these things that we've gotten used to, but it has a really interesting crypto component, is something like echo.com. So that's a really cool company there. On the other side, lots of infrastructure for people to be able to do this. So stablecoin infrastructure, treasury, yield generation, DAO infrastructure. I bet a lot on DAO infrastructure. And when you see these communities, you basically see, before you had people, then you had people in the Discord channel, and now you have people in the Discord channel with a bank account. And so that's a very powerful transition, a very powerful movement. We need to give the people in the Discord channels with the bank accounts tools for them to manage their money effectively. So that's also been another very exciting set area that I've bet on.
I think I was reading that there's more tooling for DAOs than DAOs.
Yes, that is also probably
that's
true.
you. That's from all your
That's me. That's me.
Amazing. What I'd like you to do is help me in the audience visualize perhaps some of the early influence and exposure that you had. Of course, we want to come through the middle part of the show, getting to know you personally, and that can go in many different ways. But if you could take us back as far as possible, pre-education, like when you're growing up, and set the scene for us, please.
Of course. So a couple of interesting things that I think really set me on the path that I'm on. The first one is I grew up in Portugal, and my whole family is Portuguese. However, the best student of the Portuguese Navy every year comes to the United States, or used to the postgraduate school in Monterey, California, to effectively do a master's program. And so I was lucky enough to come in my mother's belly to the United States and be born in California, which obviously sets me on a path of being an American citizen, having a passport, and thus being a lot easier for me to come back at some point in the future, right? The other interesting thing here about that passport is whenever you're talking about a fun fact, when you're growing up, when you're in middle school, when you're in high school, it is a fun fact that you have double nationality. And the affinity of Portuguese people to American culture is very high. So Portugal and the United States are very great relationships, of course, and Portugal is a very, very small country, but the affinity towards the culture and affinity towards the United States is really put on a pedestal in a way that today is just not true for many other countries. But Portugal still maintains it. And at the time, it was very high. And so being American was a fun fact. And that kind of like led me to obviously have a lot more affinity towards English, a lot more affinity towards American culture. And I think that was a little bit of a start of it. But I grew up in Portugal, so went back when I was 3 years old. And so I don't actually remember anything from being in the US, only from the videos, very poor videos that my dad recorded with those first camcorders. They're absolutely hilarious and extremely, extremely boring. TikTok really is a better format for every video than those 15 minutes and one type of shots type situation. So I grew up in Portugal. I ended up around I was 12 years old. And the background context here is my dad was in the Portuguese Navy, as I mentioned, but he was also doing his PhD in digital signal processing. So he was an academic and he taught in university. He also had written books about specifically network communications. So at 12 years old, my dad taught me how to program. And it was also around that time that his book about network communications came out, which I fell in love with, primarily because my dad had written a book, and that's really cool. And I started to try to digest what the book was about.
How would he? How would he? So sorry, it's riveting. But how would he teach you? Specifically, we're both new fathers, and so you're trying to think how to, at different ages it's different how to engage. But you're 12 here. It's super cool because your fathers wrote this book. Not that everybody would perceive it through that lens, by the way, but you did. But then, how would he actually teach you?
I think I don't exactly recall. Maybe that should be something that I would ask him directly. But my impression of it was that as any kid, I was excited about games, Nintendo games and computer games and things like that. And I think the hook was, wouldn't it be so cool if you could make one of these? Or wouldn't it be so cool if you could understand how these are made? And I think that was part of it. And also, I was lucky enough I had a cousin that was also at that time around the same age. He's 1 year older than I am. And so both of us were very excited about computer games. So kind of both of us egged each other on and were excited about it and wanted to learn. So instead of teaching one person, he was teaching two, which created sort of this like class dynamic. And then my cousin and I could actually do small programming competitions. So we both did Contacts app for my grandfather and installed it on his computer for him to like track his friends and phone numbers and things like that. That would give us feedback and then kind of like change it and tune it. All of this kind of like creates this interaction and this participation where you feel like you have a superpower and people like this superpower. And they can't do it themselves. And my dad could program, of course, but nobody else could. And so you have the superpower where computers are becoming incredibly important at that time, and yet you can program them and make things. So that was the beginning of it. And I think the gaming, wouldn't you like to make games? And this is how you make games was the hook.
And then you start getting interested around 15, maybe slightly earlier, but around 15. And I assume by that point you've become really quite competent at hacking and programming. I'm focused on security specifically.
Yeah, that one I remember.
Talk to us about that a little, please.
Yeah, that one I remember where it came from. So it turns out that if you teach a kid how to program and how to like computers, they will be on the computer all the time, no matter whether you want it or not, all the time. Like going to bed and then waking up and cover of night and starting to use the computer from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. and not wanting to go to bed. And as a parent, that is obviously upsetting because children should be outside, should be playing, should have a diverse set of experiences. At least that's what I believe, and should not be spending the whole night on a computer. So what my dad started to do was he started to install these protections, these softwares that actually were supposed to stop you from using the computer, and it had time limits, and you couldn't use the internet for portions of it. He was installing software protection on these computers, and he was attempting to obviously set boundaries and limits, the amount of time that you spend on the internet, the amount of time that you spend on a computer. And it turns out that if you teach a kid how to program, if you teach a kid how to like computers, and then you start installing protection software, the life mission of this kid of yours will be to beat this protection software. So I think that's where my interest in security got it, because he installed like 3 or 4 different ones until he gave up. And what he started to do was he just started hiding the modem in the car trunk. And since he had the keys, that was not really something that I could actually get into. So anyway, that was the beginning of it. And then in school, I had this class, which is a computer class. And these are high schoolers all around the computer, starting to use IRC, starting to do PowerPoint and Word and learning these things. And at that point, I was already so much more past it. I had IRC accounts. I knew how to program. And so I started being excited about the fact that people looked up to me. The teachers looked up to me for my computer knowledge. And that was very interesting. And so I started doing little Trojan horses, little tools that, the common thing where it occupies the whole screen and then you try to click the exit button and the exit button runs away from you or opens and closes the hard drives, all of that stuff that you did as a kid. I think it's a very common story for people to have this story of being interested in security and how to do these things because they thought it was cool. But that was how I got into it. And so from very early on, this security as my path was very obvious to me. And so I think this internal compass of where I wanted to go was actually set from very early on. which is a pretty interesting thing to have, this conviction of where you want to go from very early on.
And you end up taking CS, education, and ultimately PhD. When we were talking prior to the show, you were mulling over whether actually the PhD was crucial at all in what came next, which is interesting to debate. And there's pros and cons, but why? We're in the phase here at 15, then moving into it. Why did you choose to take it in the first instance?
So the reason why I went through network communications and then CS, I think it was obvious, which was at the time when I was doing this, there was no cybersecurity anything, right? Cybersecurity did not exist as a master's, as a PhD, as really a field. What existed was network security, because security at that time was primarily firewalls, and so there was no application security even. There was very little applications on the web. Everything was primarily static still, and those were starting up. But network security was the clear path toward security. So that's why I started on this path. The reason for the PhD, to your question, I didn't really have a choice. My dad has a PhD. My sister has a PhD. My brother-in-law has a PhD. My dad's dog, his name is Doc. And so in the family, my dad used to make this joke, which I don't know if it was, even in hindsight, not sure if it was a joke or not, but he would come to me, my sister, and he would ask, where do you want to go for dinner? And then my sister would say, I want to go there. And then he would turn to me and then turn away to his dog and ask the dog, where do you want to go for dinner? And then he would turn to me and say, yes, because in this family, only PhDs actually have the right to choose. And that was, the type of pressure that the family had. So I don't know if I ever had a choice to do a PhD or not. And I candidly never remember having that decision-making moment of whether this was something I wanted to do or not. I just jumped straight into the master's to PhD with the same advisor. I was doing well in our master's. I was publishing academic papers. I was having fun. And so I just jumped into it naturally. And I knew that the pressure at home was to follow that path.
It's an absolute masterclass from your father. I think that the whole game with getting you to try and hack the ways that he stopped you programming the whole time was all set up. You thought you were being clever. He completely played you.
Wow, I had never thought about that, but that's a pretty good one. I should also go back and ask.
And then, why might you not have needed that PhD?
Yeah, so my view on PhDs are, well, specifically in my situation, remember that, so post PhD, or actually during the PhD, really, towards the end of it, I got the opportunity. I was doing a presentation in NSTI, I believe, in San Jose, 2010. And there were a couple of people from Google and Facebook that came after my talk and said, hey, why don't you come a few months out of your PhD to work for us? And so I went back to Portugal and I started interviewing. And then very late into the process, what happened was I realized that if I was thinking of going a few months off of my PhD to go to one of these companies, I might as well to apply to a company that I really want to go to. And so I had seen on TechCrunch, Square had just raised their Series A, was founded by the founder of Twitter. There was, at that time, crypto didn't exist. So the highest application for security was protecting money. So a credit card reader where you literally hand your card to somebody else to swipe a card. That was essentially what needed the most security of everything that I could see. And then finally, at the time at Square, there was only one person working on security. So I was going to be obviously the second person to join, and I was going to have a lot of impact and learn as much as I could. And the reason why I bring this little story in is because if I had joined Square, not in 2011, but in 2009, my personal outcome would have been tremendously different. Going from employee 40 to employee, say, 3 or 4, obviously that's a very, very different outcome from an equity perspective. And even from an experience perspective, being there even earlier, right? And so if you think about that, the PhD was what stood in the middle between me joining early and not joining early. So if I could retrack this, of course, you never know. Likely to a certain extent, I was accepted at Square because I was doing a PhD and I had published papers in this area, or because I had learned communication skills, or because of many, many reasons. But the reality of it is that if there's a world in which I joined Square earlier, obviously an outcome would have been even more interesting than actually doing a PhD. So I say this jokingly, in the short term at least. Over the long term, the interesting thing is that anyone that has conviction and anyone that has real interest for and passion for a specific field, I think can get to PhD level of knowledge. A PhD taught me how to, well, first and foremost, write and read academic papers. They're not scary to me. And that is a really like very small superpower, because people get scared of math, people get scared of papers, and they kind of like just don't read them. So to a certain extent, it trains you to do that because you read hundreds of them. So that's an interesting one. The other one is taught me how to do math, and especially in distributed systems, taught me how to do proofs, convergence proofs, understand how these pseudocode algorithms work, and be able to read them and be able to just read the math language, which also doesn't scare me away from any of these papers, especially in cryptocurrency around distributed systems, which is the field that I was studying during my PhD. And I think that was interesting. But by and large, I would say that of the majority of people that try to do PhDs, because many of them end up giving up, they realize that a PhD really is necessary if you want to teach, if you want to be a professor, or if you really have this passion to like push the boundary of the science of your field. And this is the only path that you have to get there. In computer science, that's just not the case. You can push your field and you can push the boundaries, not necessarily by being a PhD, but maybe even more by starting a company, or more by starting an open source project or doing something else. So it's clearly not necessary in our field to actually get here to by doing a PhD. So that's how I think about it. It's still the right thing. If you want to be a teacher, if you want to be part of the 5% of people that want to do research the whole life, but for everybody else, I still think that it's might not be your cup of tea.
What you end up doing it in obviously ends up being monumentally valuable. So with the experience at Square, you still win there incredibly early, such a landmark business. And of course, as you say, Jack is an incredibly famous individual. What story could you tell us about Jack that perhaps is some insight into who he was then and the type of leadership that he had?
It was really interesting because I really felt that at Square, I was there for 4 years. Jack really grew as a CEO and changed pretty dramatically in terms of the person who he was. And of course, part of that I've also seen in my own journey. It's a very different company when you have 10 people than when you have over 300. The types of relationship that you can have with people, can't know everybody's name or remember it, can't actually hang out in person with all of them. So that also changes a little bit. And my impression is also probably colored by the hyper growth mode of Square. But in the beginning, he was coming in. He had just come out of Twitter. As we know, we got fired off of Twitter early on, and definitely had a chip on his shoulder and wanted to do something amazing. And he was very focused on doing it. At the time, it was kind of interesting. It was my first experience with a Silicon Valley startup. And there were lots of things that I didn't quite understand, or I thought they were kind of like corporate for him to do, or things that he said that were just didn't resonate with me, or they were clearly fell flat. I do think that over time, what I saw him do was become more and more silent, become more and more quiet, quieter and quieter. Every meeting there was in, he would say less things, but the things they would say were incredibly incisive. And so I really saw that range of, in the beginning, obviously, is campaigning for this company to be successful. He's pitching everyone. He's talking a lot. He's motivating people. And at some point, when there's momentum, he starts retreating, making sure he's hiring the best people, which is a big lesson, right? You need your exec team to be extremely strong, and that's your one job as a CEO, is to make sure your executive team is incredibly strong, and everything else falls from that, and that they are a culture fit, and that they are actually the right people for the job in the right moment for the company. And he did that. And then as he does that, you kind of like start taking a step back, focusing on strategy, focusing on being a little bit of the icon for the company. And if you're an icon for the company, you want to say the least amount of things possible, because the myth is a lot better than the reality, right? To a certain extent, this is true for everyone. And so that's a pretty interesting one. I think there was a story that was kind of interesting that I remember. There's many of them, but this one I remember because a few months ago, I had the distinct feeling of empathy of, now I understand what you were saying, or now I understand why you were struggling with this. But there was, in 2015 or something, there was a little bit of, Square was working really hard. We were working at some point, we were working weekends. So every Saturday, it was mandatory Saturdays, which was fascinating. And if you work 6 days a week, you actually work 7 days a week because you can't disconnect for one day. And so you end up working 7 days a week. You just work less on Sunday. That's basically what it is. So for a period of 6 months, we were working all weekends and all the time and pushing. And some of my fondest memories come from the hardship that came from that and from the accomplishments that we had. So at some point, people start complaining, saying that they're working too hard on the weekly town square, which is what we call the weekly meeting on Fridays that the team is having. And then Jack, people are complaining they don't have vacation, they don't have time off, they don't have these things. So Jack goes on stage and says this really tone deaf thing at the time that I was just I was surprised that he would say something like that, and that now I have some more empathy for. Still think it's a wrong thing to say, but he essentially goes in front of the little company and says something to the effect of, you're saying that you don't have vacation, but the way that I look at it is that every weekend is a small little vacation. So I treat the weekends as small vacations. That's the way you should treat them too, which of course is like very tone deaf for a CEO to go in front of the company to say. But the feelings that I now recognize of empathy are, it's very early in a business. The business is not won by any stretch of the imagination. You are struggling to have revenue. You are struggling with products. You are struggling with people. You're struggling with retention. And then all of a sudden, what you're hearing feedback is on, I don't want to work as hard. And that's just so extremely hard for a founder to hear when you yourself are also working extremely hard. And of course, people can make a claim that your ownership of the business is different. And so of course, you're going to work extremely hard because you own the business. But still, at the end of the day, the goal of giving equity is that we're all owners, and to instill this type of mentality. And whenever that's actually not corresponded, is something that is very frustrating for you as a founder. And you have to find the words, and you have to find a way to make sure that people have a great work-life blend and communicate that it's important, communicate when you yourself are taking vacation, all of those things that now are definitely best practices. But you still, today, every time something like that happens, I still have this empathy of thinking about, I know exactly what you were feeling at the time and why you would be driven to say something like that.
I want to talk about Nathan, who's been incredible partner of yours in different businesses, and now, of course, co-founder. So we're going to come back to that. I want to finish the show on that, because when I was talking to you before, I came across that it's been a really unique and amazing relationship. But I want to do a quick farm on around now. So I'm just going to ask some straight questions, and yes or no it, or go into as much detail as you would like. So
let's do it.
Is there a particular mantra or book or influence that you go back to regularly that you get a lot of energy and power from?
Yes, there is. And I actually read it recently, late last year again. There's a book called The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. Deutsch is a famous physicist, and he has written a couple of really, really fantastic books. One is The Fabric of Reality, and then The Fabric of Reality is, to a certain extent, makes an appearance within The Beginning of Infinity. So Deutsch's view is, he has views on many things, and all of them are absolutely brilliant. And it was such a jam-packed book in terms of like new ideas and new concepts, to the point of, it's a book that talks about a worldview that is my current worldview. So that's how much of an impact it had on me. He views the Enlightenment of the 18th century as effectively near the beginning of an infinite sequence of, he calls it purposeful knowledge creation. So we are at the beginning of a sequence of infinite knowledge creation. Knowledge is infinite, and there's infinite amount of knowledge for us to pursue. And that's such a weird conceptual framework for you to think through, especially when you start thinking about, in reality, there's always this feeling that things are slowing down, and that innovation is slowing down, and that all the things that are known, there to be known, are known. Across history, we always have naysayers and doomsayers that we're going to get in trouble, the population is growing too fast, we're going to run out of resources. And all of them effectively discount human ingenuity and the fact that knowledge is, in fact, infinite, in that there are infinite sets of combinations and discoveries that are there to be had. And so that is just such a big point of, almost, it's not religion, it's just a worldview, but it's almost religious in nature. And I think that the book does a really good job at talking about how society evolves, how mimetic theory, so how memes actually propagate and how knowledge propagates. He talks about how the multiverse actually comes into this, and how to unify quantum physics with traditional physics. So all of these like different elements, he talks so eloquently about all of it, and it's pretty tightly packed with amazing information in a book that I highly, highly recommend. And I would say that if you read that book, you get a really good inkling of my worldview at the moment.
Oh my God, I love it. Thank you so much. If you had the front cover of a publication that you hold really dear, that has huge distribution, let's think, ranging between Forbes, Bloomberg, what would you put on it as a message?
I think I would put some variation of "It's time to build." I think it going from the book itself, knowledge is infinite. And the only thing that we need to do to make it come to existence is to build it or discover it or do something that is productive for humanity. So I think that is my primary directive is to learn as much as I can, to extract as much knowledge from this mystery of nature, and to build as many things that I think are value accrual for humanity. And so it's time to build. I think it should be kind of like an ever-present message. Everybody that can start a startup should start a startup. Anybody that can start a business should start a business. Anybody that can go into science and discover kind of the secrets of nature should go do that. And I really am fundamentally pro that. And so that would be the message that I would say.
Love it. In terms of in your day, is there something that you've got as a habit or a ritual that keeps you level with all the potential stress, pressure that obviously someone in your position, I mean, it's just had ever since your father was, saying that you're not the doc in the family home to the doc, and playing you. What keeps you balanced? Is there some type of walk that you do, some type of reading, meditation? What's the thing for you?
It's until my son was born, it was books. I've always had a goal of 50 books a year. And think about 50 books as a high level goal. I do go for quality over quantity, but it is a goal that I've achieved 4 out of 7 years. So not a bad hit rate. And that really calms me down. In fact, I moved to Seattle. People say that the weather is terrible, but I love the Seattle weather because you get to be in front of a fireplace reading all year long, because all year long is cold, right? With the very few exception of 2 months out of the summer, but all year long you can actually sit by a fireplace and read.
Oh my God.
So
do you have a ritual for your reading as well? Like, you need to be in a certain type of chair, the far on there.
Actually, I can read mostly anywhere, but I have a preference. I absolutely have a preference. There's a chair, there's a preference. The couch is a preference. One of the things that I absolutely love doing is reading side by side with my wife. That counts to me as very high quality time. She's reading her books. Sometimes we're reading the same book, which is absolutely fascinating. I usually try to divide fiction and fantasy 50%, 25% technical books. So books about cryptography, books about just computer science, then 25% what I would call business books, range or noise or any of those books that are popular Silicon Valley books. I would say there's the other 25%. And we do overlap books sometimes, read them together, discuss them. So it really is beautiful. It's not just for myself, it's part of the family fabric. So that's pretty interesting. And then after my son was born, I still have that, but spending time with him, it's in the moment, it's really special and definitely allows you to center yourself on the things that matter.
What keeps you up at night?
Probably too much coffee. That's what keeps me up at night.
That's the practical
Joking aside, joking aside, actually, look, one of the things that I try to do I tried meditation. I'm not able to be consistent with it, but the techniques of actually being able to take thoughts out of your mind and put them in a bucket, and that's very effective for me. And so I don't really stay awake at night thinking about the business anymore. Not like the first 2 years of the business, because I built the tools to make sure that I don't. The other thing is obviously following a little bit of get things done model, where any single thought that you have, you jot it down on your notes, and they're synced everywhere, and they're there and they're timed, and they will show up eventually. So you don't stay up all night just thinking about these problems. That it's a morning type of problem, and everything looks better in the light of the morning.
Amazing. Do you think you're following your father's footsteps and you've got a book in you?
I think so. I think that's something that I've been toying with, and my dad has 4 or 5 at this point. He's now writing a novel. which is absolutely fascinating. The range of that man is just absolutely fascinating. Also, I'm only 1/10 as smart as he is, and so I don't know if I can compare myself up to his standards. But yeah, I think there will be the easy thing for me is a technical book, a book about crypto, a book about. I think it's way too early in my career to do any kind of victory lap, so nothing written about me. I don't want to write anything about me or biographies or anything like that. I think I'll have to do something truly spectacular for me to even have that instinct of feeling like I have something to share. And so it would probably be a technical book, somehow around the area of distributed systems, cryptography, or more on the entrepreneurship side, something like that. I think is the likely outcome.
Amazing. And please do, if you and your father be so kind, when he needs some soundboarding post publishing it, you just ping it my way. I'll have a read.
Sounds good. Will do. That's a promise.
Final question of this round. You're on searching for Mana Show. So Mana is in gaming your magic. You've got power, then you've got mana. It's the magic, it's the superpower, it's the ability to sword fight, jump high, run quickly. What's your mana?
I could say a couple of things or a few things for that one. I think one of them is the fact that I'm very passionate about what I do. And I think that attracts very high talented people. And so I've been able to, throughout my career and throughout my life, just grab on to amazing, amazing individuals. And I think Nathan, my co-founder, is a great example of that. But I have so many other friends that are extremely, extremely talented, extremely successful, that I've been able to attract into my orbit by the sheer power and will of being passionate about something and convincing them that they should be passionate about it too. So I think that's a pretty big one. Another big one is an internal compass. From very early on, I think we talked about in this episode, I knew where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And so that internal compass of always knowing what the right direction is and being very good at decision making of what gets you closer to that outcome is also kind of a superpower, because you have the confidence to then again aggregate everybody around you and have them come with you on this path. And so I think that's also very special. They're interrelated, but kind of different, unique superpowers. So yeah, I would use one of those two.
Oh, use them both. You got two, even better. Amazing. Love it. At some point, we're going to make mana cards for all of our guests.
Yes, and it should be playable. Absolutely.
That would be a good card to get.
I want mine to be as rare as the Black Lotus on Magic.
Well, we shall make that happen. So Nathan, please tell us where you first met Nathan.
The story of Anchorage is the story of Nathan, and they're intrinsically linked and forevermore. The reason for it is because Nathan and I actually joined Square the same week in 2011. And Nathan came from Indiana. Turns out with a very similar set of values as I brought from Portugal. And so we instantly bonded. He joined the security team. We led the security team together for those 4 years. And there was an amazing relationship that was formed from very early on. Nathan also wanted to create a company for a long time. I also want to create a company for a long time. So it was just predestination. So the moment we met, it was kind of like we latched onto each other, worked together, and then ended up doing some really cool projects at Square. For example, Nathan and I worked together on the first encrypted credit card reader at Square. So we actually have the patent on the little encrypted credit card reader that I'm sure you swipe your card on. So the funny story there is that we actually sent Nathan to China for 3 months to go to these very, very cheap factories, because again, we were giving out the readers for free. And so Nathan was working in China hours, and I was in the United States, the only person working and from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. to support him on the China manufacturing of the readers. And so for 3 months, we only had each other to talk to because everybody else was asleep at some point of the day. And he was in these like very hardcore conditions of very hot factories that they were so hot that his MacBook laptop would just shut down because it was just too hot to operate. And so, that adversity was shared with one another. Many other things have happened at Square, the working weekends, the family situations, professional situations, all of it we've weathered through. And then we actually ended up joining together as a pre-product acqui-hire, 2 for the price of 20 type situation. We moved from Square to Docker. We were thinking whether post-Square was the right time to start a company, but we were very cognizant of it's likely a company that we create to be an enterprise security company. So we wanted to learn more about sales. We wanted to learn more about fundraising. We wanted to learn more about open source. We wanted to learn more about all of these different types of company building skills that we just didn't see us happening. Could we have struggled through them? Probably. But the chances of success of starting a company comes obviously from the two founders and their skill set and the things that you can do from day one and things you're not going to delay or not going to know how to hire for, et cetera. So we knew that our likelihood of success was a lot higher if we joined a company that was absolutely blowing up in terms of use. Today, Docker runs on over half of the internet and our code is still in Docker protecting it. And as an engineer, your claim to fame should always be measured by how many billions of computers on the internet is running your code, which for me at this point, I get to happily say that it's lots of billions of computers.
I think it's a really good lesson that 99% of the time, not always, because there are just these really unique scenarios where people drop out of college and a company just, kind of pops up out of the ether. Not that necessarily always goes well if you then track it. But that patience and that strategic thinking is so rare, where you decided together to go on to the next project because you needed to go and acquire this experience, skill set before, knowing that you passionately wanted to then go set up your own enterprise. A really brilliant lesson. And the fact you guys did that together just must have made you on the side of a dream investment for a venture capitalist. You talk us through that founding of the business.
Yeah. So the other thing that is worth considering is when you are starting a company, I always think the better ideas are the ones that you've been working on or that you've been thinking through, or that not manufactured. You're not going to manufacture an idea out of nowhere. I've never really thought that was at least the path for us. And so you have to be in the right position with the right people and wait for long enough for those opportunities to appear. And then you have to say yes. And that's what the founding of the business was. In 2017, early 2017, all of the ICO boom of Ethereum had all these investors invest in crypto startups. And so there was one company that reached out to me because they had lost the passphrase to a $1.5 million Bitcoin wallet. And they offered me 20% if I could break into it. And so that's absolutely, absolutely fascinating to understand that incredibly, incredibly sophisticated investors were also incredibly unsophisticated when it came to private key security and operational security, right? It's absolutely crazy. And so we started doing more and more consulting. I started doing more consulting on weekends until I realized, this is a business. And so it was more recognition that there was a business there of something that I was already being paid to as a consultant, and having the right partner with the right knowledge in the right place and the right setting for us to kind of start this together. And so that's why I say that Anchorage Digital really is a story of Nathan and I, because we had to wait 7 full years of working together day in and day out until the opportunity came along that we could then jump into it and say yes to. And you're absolutely right. I think what we were called at the time, and I think Chris Dixon made this joke at some point, which was we were the perfect founder market fit. You have two security engineers working together for over 7 years in companies that are fantastic, like Square and like Docker, that now decide to start a company exactly within their wheelhouse. I literally have a PhD in computer science and distributed systems, finance expertise at Square for 4 years, building hardware security modules and building security, and then operational security at Docker, large scale open source. Crypto is an open source phenomenon that is distributed systems and operates in the financial world. So there was really a perfect Venn diagram of our skill set. The way that I tell this story is the universe just handed us in a silver platter the Venn diagram of the things that we knew how to do. And so it was just, we just had to say yes.
The universe knew where to go. I love it. So inspiring. You talk with that much passion. Let's take this moment, because I know I've taken a lot of your very, very precious time, and it's super kind of you. And we got many more shows to do. But let's now go Hollywood. What can you do with this platform, with this opportunity? Set the time frame as far out as you'd like.
Maybe it's worth talking about what Anchorage Digital aims to do. So what we want to do is to allow companies to build products in crypto. Why? Because we believe crypto should exist. Crypto needs to exist because it is not going to replace traditional financial infrastructure, but it's going to bring competition to infrastructure that hasn't really evolved much over the past hundreds of years. If you think about it, think back and tell me one vertical of companies whose incumbents have been around for 200 years. It doesn't really exist outside of JP Morgan Chase, BNY Mellon. You know, BNY Mellon, one of the angel investors was Alexander Hamilton, one of the forefathers of our country. Alexander Hamilton invested in BNY Mellon, and somehow they're still a top 3 custodian in the world. So clearly there's something here that's happening. And what is that? Well, there's a very high bar of entry. There's an oligopoly of players. There's charters that don't allow people to come in. There's many things. But we need to bring competition because we need better products for everyone, you and I, for consumers. And the way to do it is obviously through competition, and crypto is bringing competition. And I think a perfect example is the example of stablecoins. If stablecoins are such a better settlement mechanism, then people start adopting them, and then the traditional world has to catch up, has to do 24/7, has to do instant settlement, has to do these types of properties that we're getting from this system. So Anchorage sees itself as, we are an institutional only player. We are only helping institutions. Instead of trying to build the specific product market fit in one of the 100 different areas that we could, and going towards consumer and building a consumer brand, we're just here to have more shots on target so that more companies can more easily attempt their hypothesis of how crypto can be used in X particular business to actually help disrupt some industry or help an industry or increase the adoption of something. And that's what we're here to do, more shots on target, to help from anywhere from a corporate to a fintech to a very established large bank to a tiny, tiny startup. We're here to allow them to have infrastructure that is safe, easy, and regulated for them to build. So pie in the sky, in 5 to 10 years, Anchorage is supporting 20% of the world's economy. The world's economy has moved to a large extent over digitally native money, internet native money, and Anchorage is powering a large percentage of it. That is the dream.
How big does that make? I mean, talk to me numbers here. How big does that make you guys?
It's 1,000x from here, very easily. So we are a $3 billion company at this point. We could very easily to 1,000x if we get to this goal. If you think of the size of the economy, if you do really believe, it's very path dependent. Many things have to go exactly perfectly right, which means that it's a very low probability outcome. But man, the expected value is still incredibly, incredibly big.
Well, and you've made a lot of shrewd, strategic decisions for your career. So we'll watch this closely. Michael from Chainalysis, a recent guest, predicts that over the next 5 years, there'll be more and more conversion. But over the next 10 to 15, every single company will be on the blockchain. So in that scenario, and then you having 20%, it's monumental.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
those are very large numbers.
I just read the Player Piano, which is a great book of the dystopian variety. And it really begs many questions. One of the questions is, the constant advancement of technology, kind of classic AI thinking here, is that good for man? What do you think about that? Is AI and is the constant evolution of tech friend or foe?
I think I love Kurt. I love his books. I'm an absolute avid Kurt fan. I do think dystopia fiction, we need to read it because we need to understand that there is outcomes here that are not good. But I do think technology is primarily a force for good because humanity is primarily a force for good. And if we look at the history of humanity, we've progressively gotten better at doing things. Our morals have evolved in a way that doesn't actually need to resort to some higher power in religion to actually be maintained in the fear of hell. We've come so far that we actually have time to think about dystopian futures, which was something that we didn't have 100 years ago. And so just that is a monumental success. And I'm a big believer in human ingenuity, and that for every problem that we are bound to face of our own creation, there will also be a solution of our own creation.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, we've touched on DAOs, we've touched on the need for innovation in the space. And of course, someone like you or potentially me gets quite passionate about the technologies and the methodologies. But in reality, broadly speaking, it just will be wonderful to see the user cases where it improves things like, you're in America, but I can tell you in the United Kingdom, the process of getting mortgages, one of the really important things to people for whatever reason is the ownership of their property, their environment, somewhere that they can really relax and spend time with their family or whatever it is. And that process is so archaic. It's just a complete joke. And it's just such a good example of like the credit markets and really things that just should slicken up. And so, I hope many things, but I certainly hope that the innovation in the financial service sector just like rapidly escalates. And I suspect it's about to over the next 5 years. So it's really exciting. Just to close out, is there any message that you'd like to say to the audience?
I think the biggest message that I have for folks is, especially during a bear market, I think this is the best time for people to look at a space without a lot of the noise that it traditionally has in bull markets. In bull markets, it becomes very hard for you to come into crypto and distinguish what's good from what's not good. So if you're ever been interested in the space, now it's the right time for you to come in and build.
Like your Forbes cover would say, get building.
That's right.
Diogo, thank you so much for coming on to Searching for Mana. Congratulations for your success today. And we will be avidly watching your progress.
Thank you for having me.